Dual extrusion 3D printing is awesome for a couple of reasons. For starters, it helps you to breathe life into a model that might otherwise appear flat by highlighting certain features of that model. Also, it allows you to print with water-soluble support materials such as PVA. Sure, for a lot of models you can use the same material you're printing your primary part in to print the support material, but for more complex models this can leave undesirable surface finishes that require you to have to sand the part, and for really complex geometries without the use of PVA you might not be able to print that part at all. With dual extrusion and PVA you can print your primary part in the model material that you want and the scaffolding or the support material in that PVA material, so that way afterwards you can then take your part, submerge it in lukewarm water, and after a certain amount of time you're left with just your finished part, which is a beautiful thing. Now for dual extrusion there are quite a few different setups. Starting off with, there is the mixing extruder or the mixing hot end, where it takes in two filaments that then spits out of one nozzle. This is kind of interesting, but in my experience it is the least reliable, and although it will allow you to do some kind of cool things with combining colors, again it's not very repeatable and you cannot use PVA through this setup. The next type of dual extrusion is where you have two hot ends that are stationary side by side. Now, I think that this setup is better than the mixing hot end. However, the issue with this is that if you've got any deviation in your nozzles, then when that hot end goes over your part, that nozzle can hit your part and dislodge it or knock it over and ruin your part altogether. Now this setup will allow you to use PVA, but again, it's not ideal because of the fact that your nozzles have to be so perfectly calibrated. The two main systems that are most common or popular as of right now are the nozzle rocking system and IDEX, or independent dual extrusion. The nozzle rocking system is similar to that stationary setup where the heads are side by side, but they use either something like a servo or a mechanical switch to physically lift and drop the hot end out of the way of the other one. So that way it'll be printing in your main support material, it'll either go over and hit something or use a servo to raise the other hot end or drop the other hot end. So that way there's only one nozzle that's closest to your print, which eliminates the issue of hitting that part by having those two nozzles side by side. Then there's IDEX, which is two hot ends that are not connected at all, which is what gives them the independent dual extrusion name. They do share a axis, so they're both riding on the same X rail typically, but they are not stuck to each other, which will allow you to do some unique things that you can't do with the other methods of dual extrusion. March of last year, I reviewed a printer called the WEEDO X40. This was a dual extrusion, fully enclosed 3D printer. It did have stationary hot ends, but I thought it was pretty impressive. At the time, I was able to do some pretty sweet dual extrusion prints, and again, I was able to do PVA printing, and I did a very complex model using PVA that I couldn't do on any of my other printers. Well, a few weeks ago, WEEDO reached out to me letting me know that they had a new printer that was going to be launching on Kickstarter in the next month or so here, asking if I would be interested in reviewing this printer. And I've got mixed feelings about Kickstarter printers because of all the things that I've seen and heard. I have not backed one personally, so initially I was a little bit hesitant. However, after they explained to me what this printer was going to offer and that it was going to be an IDEX machine under $1,000, I had to check it out and at least see what this printer was all about. So in this video, we are going to take a look at the WEEDO X40 IDEX printer. We're going to take a look at the specs, we're going to take a look at the features, we're going to look at the outside of the machine, the inside of the machine, and of course we're going to do some dual extrusion 3D printing. I hope you guys are excited, and without further ado, let's get right into today's video. So starting off, let's take a look at the specs of the X40. The machine is made up of aluminum extrusions. It has a build volume of 300 by 300 by 400 millimeters, and it is a 24-volt system with the main board and the power supply being housed neatly underneath the machine. There is a really nice 4.5-inch touchscreen on the front of the machine that will allow you to set up your printer and interface with the printer, as well as start and stop print jobs. And as I mentioned, the motion system, or the extrusion system at least, is IDEX, and they are riding back and forth on the X-axis, which is a linear rail. The extruder style is Bowden, and both of the two extruders have their own filament runout sensors, which is a really nice feature. The hot ends, however, are not all metal, so you will be limited to printing with PLA, ABS, some rigid TPUs, and PETG as long as you do not take it above 245 or max 250. Again, for ABS printing, if that's something you want to do, then you certainly can do it, but you will want to make sure that you enclose this printer for consistent results. This printer does have two Z-axis stepper motors and two lead screws, which is great. There's automatic bed leveling and the cable management is very clean. There's even a little camera that mounts to the front of the machine that will allow you to monitor your prints while you are away from your 3D printer. And as far as connectivity goes, you have USB, micro SD card, as well as Wi-Fi to start and stop print jobs. Now that we've gone over the outside of the machine, let's take a quick look at what is going on the inside. This machine is powered by a 32-bit board with very beefy terminals and TMC 2208 stepper motor drivers, which I'm happy to report means that this machine is very quiet. The loudest aspect really is when the filament is changing or just from the fans itself. The board looks really awesome, and it says it's called the 3D R73 by Red Bank. I did look online to see if I could find any additional information on this specific board, which I was not able to do. And WEEDO let me know that this board is running a firmware that is based off of Marlin. As I mentioned previously, this is a 24-volt system, and the PSU is 480 watts. There's also a separate relay board for the heated bed. Overall, nothing too crazy was going on underneath the hood, and everything is routed very nicely. Now let's talk about setup for this printer. The machine came very well packaged and was even shrink wrapped. There was foam around the entire printer, very thick foam to make sure that it wasn't damaged in shipping. If you're asking why I'm mentioning this, I'm letting you know that this is very important. There is more than one occasion where I've received a 3D printer to review and it has showed up completely banged up, scratched up, or broken. So it might seem small that I talk about things like packaging and foam, but it's very, very important to ensure that the manufacturer has taken the time to ensure that this printer will get from point A to point B in the condition that you expect it to arrive in. So along with the printer, you're going to receive two small spools of PLA that are 200 grams apiece, and of course your usual accessories like a micro SD card, a scraper, and a clippers for clipping the filament. As far as assembly goes, it's really simple. There is a printed out quick start guide, and all in all assembly is something like 17 screws, which 17 screws might sound like a lot, but it's basically 4 screws that bolt the top frame to the bottom frame, 4 screws that bolt the filament or the filament spool holders to the top of the machine, 4 or 5 screws on each side that just adds some extra rigidity to the frame, and then 1 screw for the camera Wi-Fi module. And so install is very, very easy. There's I think 4 different wires you have to plug in, 2 for the stepper motors and then 2 for the main wires that everything runs through. But all in all, setup should be no more than 15 or 20 minutes for this printer. Once the printer is assembled, it's time to go through the bed calibration, which is a piece of cake. The machine does a really good job of walking you through this. What that looks like is turning on the printer, going through the initial leveling sequence where it has you take a piece of paper and the nozzle will go around to the 4 different corners of the bed, where you'll then adjust the knobs looser or tighter to make it where you can feel the piece of paper on the nozzle, but it's not actually scratching that piece of paper. Once you complete that, it will go ahead and probe 9 points on the bed, which will take what you've manually adjusted and then compensate for it in real time while printing if there's any deviation, which there always is because we're not perfect. And then lastly, it's going to ask you to adjust your Z offset. The Z offset is just how far you want the nozzle to be from the bed when printing. Again, like I mentioned, you take a piece of paper for this and you typically want to feel the nozzle, but you don't want the nozzle scraping into the paper. The bed on this printer uses what's kind of like a BuildTech sheet, but it almost sticks too well to your prints. And so I recommend, if you've printed before and you know what leveling normally feels like, having the nozzle slightly further away. In my experience with this printer, it's going to allow you to have the nozzle slightly further away and still stick really, really well, but it won't be stuck too well that you won't be able to get the print off the bed or you won't damage the sheet. So again, I recommend just having it just a hair further away than you normally would, and that seemed to work out perfectly for me. Next, I loaded up 2 spools of PLA that I had laying around. I plugged in the micro SD card to see what was loaded up on the SD card, and I wanted to obviously test out the dual color. Now, the X, Y, and Z offsets between the 2 hot ends are meant to be calibrated at factory, but I wanted to check this out for myself. There is a small file on the SD card called 2-color test, which I ran. It basically prints out a small rectangle with one of the colors and then a small rectangle on top of that in the different color. And by looking at that, you can make sure that your X and Y axis line up and that the blocks are perfectly stacked. And so I ran that, which was about a 15-minute print. And when I ran that, I was able to see that the Y-axis looked perfect, the Z-axis looked perfect, but the X-axis was slightly off. Luckily, calibrating this is really easy, and there is a rough and a fine calibration test print on the SD card. All you do is print these where the hot end will go ahead and print a series of cubes with different numbers on top. Each of those cubes is slightly offset differently. So then you just go ahead and tell the printer which number has the best or closest offset to perfect, and it will save that and remember that for prints moving forward. So once I print out the test cubes, I wanted to print out something a bit more exciting. There was a vase model pre-sliced on the SD card that looked really nice. One thing I really like about the screen on this printer is it's got a very clear image of what you're about to print. It gives you a preview. It tells you how long it's going to print, which is fairly standard, but not all printers tell you that. But it also tells you how much filament it's going to take, how many grams it will take. And granted, at the time you slice the file on your slicer, that normally tells you, but being at your printer, maybe you've printed this multiple times, or you're printing something you haven't printed in a while and you've got your spool. It's nice being able to get a general idea of whether you'll have enough filament to complete that print. So when you go to print a file on this printer, because it's IDEX, you get some unique options other than just print. You can print the file just like you wanted to, just a single extrusion, normal printed file, or you've got the option to print in duplication mode or mirror mode. Duplication mode means that if the printed file or the file you want to print is only going to need one hot end and you can fit it on half of the bed, you can actually print out two of them at the same time. So the hot ends will work in unison with each other and print out the same part. So that's exactly what I did, and what this does is it's great for someone that wants to do batch printing or needs more than one of the same part, because it's almost like having two 3D printers in one for the sake of something like this. Mirror mode is very similar to duplication mode, but if you didn't guess it, it's the mirrored image of something. So let's say you needed to print like a left and right shoe, or if you're printing out a car part, you needed like a left and right mirror or part of a door, then that's what that does. It prints out the exact same version of something, but a mirrored copy of it. So that is something that's really unique about IDEX printers that no other dual extrusion type of 3D printer is capable of. So as I mentioned, I ran that vase in duplication mode using two different PLAs, and the end results were awesome. I got two very beautiful looking vases with no skipped layers, no shifted layers. It looked fantastic, which had me really, really excited. Once done with that, I was ready to do some dual extrusion 3D printing. Ironically enough, there was a Matter Hackers 3D fill that was pre-sliced on the SD card, and of course I had to print that. So I went ahead and loaded up some silver and some red PLA, and I hit print. The whole time it was printing, I was looking at the part throughout the entire print, which was roughly 6 to 8 hours, and it looked like it was going really well, but there was an ooze shield around the entire model, and so I couldn't exactly tell until the print was completed. And once I ripped off the ooze shield and saw the finished part inside of that, I was completely blown away. The colors were perfect. The dual extrusion, there was no dripped filament anywhere. There was no misplaced color. It was without a doubt one of, if not the best dual extrusion color 3D prints I've ever gotten. Once that print was done, I thought I need to now go ahead and slice something and take a look at the software side of things. So WEEDO does have their own slicer, which is great because not many slicers have IDEX capabilities just natively baked in. WEEDO did let me know also that their slicer is based off of the Cura engine. Things are certainly placed in different areas, but there was a lot of settings. All the settings that I need or would normally want were there, plus plenty more. So I went ahead and went online and I found a super adorable model of a cat in a box that I knew I had to print. So I sliced that in the slicer, which was again, really simple to do. I used mostly just presets because the parts I had been getting off of this seemed so good. I was like, I don't really want to mess around with things too much as far as the dual extrusion aspect of things go. So I left it pretty much default and went ahead and sliced and printed that model. So with this model, I got it starting to print. I went to bed and I woke up to a complete model that looked adorable because the cat's eyes were peeking out over the ooze shield, and I was really excited. It almost feels like opening a gift removing an ooze shield to see what's beneath it. Of course, sometimes I'm sure you don't get what you're hoping for, but in this instance, again, the model was perfect, the cat was adorable, and this machine was just blowing me away as far as its dual color capabilities. So I'd seen that the duplication mode worked well. I'd seen that the dual extrusion was incredibly impressive for 2 colors, but I wanted to check out how it would work with PVA, or water-soluble support material. So I found a very complex box on online that is meant to be almost a bit of a PVA stress test that you could not print this model with a single extrusion machine. It's only for machines that can print with PVA. So I downloaded that model, sliced that model, I loaded up some very, very old PVA, the same PVA I used 2 years ago with the WEEDO F192, and I really wasn't expecting much because I knew that this PVA was really wet, and so I originally had planned on drying it out, but figured, let's just throw it on here and see what happens. Well, I was really shocked that even with the popping sounds that the PVA was making, the machine was laying it down in the correct areas and it was sticking. There was very little areas where I saw that, oh yeah, the PVA is not laying down because it's too wet. It seemed to do a pretty good job. Now, I would always recommend drying out your filament. PVA, with how hygroscopic it is, certainly should be, but yeah, it did a great job even with this material being wet. So once the part was complete, I went ahead and dumped it into a little mason jar with warm water where I let it sit. I did change the mason jar's water out twice throughout the next 24 hours because it got really, really hazy. I couldn't see the part, and I occasionally, like maybe 2 to 3 times, shook it up really well just so that way to make sure that if there was any PVA that was trying to get out, I could kind of agitate it out. And by the end of that 24 hours, I was left with a very, very impressive model with no PVA left inside at all. So I strongly believe that this machine will have no issues printing with PVA, especially if your PVA, it doesn't suck and you dry it out like you're supposed to do, then I don't see any reason why you couldn't use it for much larger prints and have great success with it, which is also really, really exciting and something that I plan on doing for some complex models that I've kind of looked at but put on the back burner for a long time. So the last thing I printed on this machine was a dual colored headphone stand. This was a MakerBot model that Mosaic Manufacturing went ahead and redesigned so that way it was dual color. It looked awesome. I liked the silver and red that I had loaded on my printer, and the HyperX Cloud headphones I normally use are kind of a black and red color scheme, so I was like, yeah, this will look super cool on my desk. So I went ahead and printed that, which was a fairly long print at somewhere around 16-ish hours, and once again, the results were very, very impressive, and the headphone stand looks fantastic. Now, as always, I don't think there's really any such thing as a perfect machine, and I do have a few little things that I would like to point out that I think could be improved upon. The first of those being the IDEX machine. Every time it does a tool change, it actually goes ahead and spits out a little bit of filament, and then it goes over a little wire brush and cleans it off to make sure that it's clean before printing your part, which works incredibly well. However, those little bits of filament will then drop down on your desk, and if you're running a long print like I did multiple times, you'll start to get lots of filament piled up on your desk or on your floor, which ends up being a big mess. Now, lots of other IDEX machines have tiny little buckets that sit underneath, or I don't want to call them buckets because it sounds big, but tiny little cups, if you will, that will catch that filament, so when your print's done, you can then take it over to your trash and dump it out. Well, the X40 does not have that, and it's not a huge deal. You can certainly very easily print it out, but I do think it would be nice if they ended up coming up with a little simple solution like that they can include, so that way, again, it doesn't make a big mess in your work area, and when your print's done, you can dump them out. Small thing, but still worth noting. So the other thing I like to point out is with the camera. Now, WEEDO does have an app that will allow you to actually monitor your printer on the go, but as of right now, this app is only for Android devices. Me, being an iPhone user, was not able to test out this app at all. I did ask them how long until they think that this app will be available for iOS devices, and they said about a month, so I am optimistic that it will be coming out soon, but during the time I made this video, it was not something I was able to test out. That being said, you can check on the camera from their slicer, and that is what I did, so that is cool. You can at least check it on your local network. The camera's quality is pretty low quality. It's certainly not something that you would want to use to make time lapses with, but it's at least good enough to be able to see if your part has knocked over or whether your print stopped for some weird reason. So I still think it's a really nice feature to have, but again, you won't be blown away by the image quality of this camera. So WEEDO let me know that the Kickstarter will be going live in the next month roughly here, and the Kickstarter backer price will be $500 and the final retail price will be around $700, which to me, $700 is still very, very impressive for what you're getting with this machine. And whether you plan on backing the Kickstarter, not backing the Kickstarter, or waiting till it comes out later on, I really think that WEEDO has something special here with their X40, and this is going to be hands down the machine that I'm using for dual extrusion 3D printing moving forward on this channel. Anyone that's watched my channel for a long period of time knows that I review a ton of printers on this channel, especially over the course of the many years I've been running this channel. And it's not all that often that a machine comes along that just blows me away. Well, with this machine, I made sure to reach out to WEEDO and let them know, hey, I think you guys have something killer here. tell all of your team that worked on this machine that they did a fantastic job. I am very, very impressed with this printer. So again, this is the WEEDO X40. I am super excited to get to test out this machine more and again, add it into my lineup of machines that I can do projects with, especially dual extrusion projects, which I haven't had anything reliable dual extrusion wise until I got this X40. If you do want to find out more or end up purchasing one for yourself, I'll place links in the description when they're available. At the time of recording this, at least, the Kickstarter is not live and I don't think there's really any product listings. So as those become available and WEEDO provides me with those links, I will definitely place them in the comments down below. And if there's any questions you have on something I didn't cover, I really tried to be as thorough as possible, but let me know in the comments down below and I will do my best to answer them. And if I don't have those answers, I have no problem reaching out to WEEDO directly to finding out those answers for you. As always, you guys rock. Thank you so much for continuing to come back and supporting this channel, watching, commenting, liking. I make a video every single Saturday, so if you're not subscribed, be sure to subscribe because there's always fresh content coming your way. And if you want to support the channel furthermore, I will place links down below to my Patreon where there are some super cool rewards and maybe some new stuff coming to Patreon pretty soon here. And that is a great way to help me out. And I appreciate all of you that allow me to spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you guys. On that note, this has been Daniel from ModBot, and I will see you guys in my next video. Peace, guys.